At some point in time, communists made borscht and stew out of other communists. No, seriously. Let's explore. Hello everyone and welcome to the Freedom Alternative. Now, although I do have my own moratorium on World War II stories, basically I said that I'm not going to tell or discuss World War II stories for at least another decade, probably more than that. I'll have to make an exception because I found something, well, not only something that I hadn't known about, but something that I'm pretty sure most people hadn't known about. So we're going to read a small passage from this book, 1941. Hold on a second, because this book was first, the author is Romanian speaking, but was first published in English because by Cornell University, A Satellite Empire, Romanian Rule in Southwestern Ukraine, 1941-1942. That's the name of the book in English. The name of the author is Vladimir Solonari. I think he's a professor at Florida University or something like that. I know he lives in Florida. But he's from Chisinau, and up until very recently, he used to be pro-Russian. And then, well, he's no longer pro-Russian. In any event, this book was published, well, in Romanian in 2021, I think in English in 2020. So it's a relatively fresh book. The author is essentially a bookworm. He spent quite literally decades in the library studying KGB documents and especially NKVD documents. And, you know, he tells multiple stories about, well, the work of the partisans during World War II and how how World War II essentially was perceived by various security forces in the Soviet Union. And then he gets to the catacombs underneath Odessa. Now, as it happens, I have just been to the catacombs of Odessa, I believe in September 2021. I've been there multiple times, but last time I was there, I also took footage from those specific catacombs very close to where this following story happened, where Mr. Solonari describes it. So, okay, without further ado, let me read. Catacombs is the word usually used to describe the stone quarries underneath Odessa and the surrounding area, such as the villages Kuyalnik and Usatovo. Constantly excaved from early 19th century onwards for the Kokrina, their total length is estimated now to be an amazing 1,400 kilometers just underneath the city proper. They are sinuous corridors, some interconnected with others, some rather dead ends, with more than 1,000 openings. These catacombs posed a challenge in the 20th century for the authorities, first the Tsarist authorities and then the Soviet ones, for these catacombs ended up being a place of refuge for the violent gangs that would terrorize the locals. In the weeks prior to the final Soviet withdrawal in front of the invading force, the Soviet command decided to use the catacombs as a base for their own terrorist groups, which would be left behind enemy lines. Most of the groups in the catacombs were created and led by NKVD officers, some of them locals, some of them on a mission from Moscow. The catacomb groups created by the Communist Party were led by local party apparatchiks. Highly concerned with ensuring absolute secrecy, or konspiratia, the Soviet bosses made sure that the group leaders did not know of each other. In doing so, this led to tensions and suspicions whenever the groups would meet each other in the catacombs. The group would be supplied with ammunition and supplies. They were supposed to benefit from a network of spies and other connections in the city. However, their military and/or combatant efficiency turned out to be pretty low, while the human casualty toll ended up very high. Particularly tragic was the story of a group of 18 members under the command of NKVD officer Alexander Soldatyenko, whose military rank is not mentioned anywhere in the available documents. His group's mission seems to have been improvised, given that the initial task turned out to be impossible. The initial task involved going through the enemy lines before the fall of Odessa to conduct sabotage. Just a short while before the Romanians came, the group entered the catacombs through the entrance on Dalnitskaya Street, number 47. Unfortunately for the group, this catacomb was a dead end, and they had not known that, and all of the ulterior attempts to establish contact with their connection man in the city failed. Informed by the locals, the Romanians found the entrance and tried to get in on November the 13th, 1941. They were greeted with automatic fire and lost one man. As a result of this failure, the Romanians simply blocked the only available entrance, essentially sentencing the group to death through starvation. Realizing this reality, some members of the group proposed to the commander that they surrender, but Soldatyenko categorically forbade even the consideration of such thing and threatened that he will execute anyone who attempts such thing. One member of his group was assassinated on his order for having sown panic in the group. The food reserves ran out pretty fast, and Soldatyenko ordered the execution of two members of the group, husband and wife. He selected them for execution because they weren't members of the Communist Party. Their flesh was put in salt and then stored. Later on, it was used to make borscht and stew, which allowed the group to survive an additional 2 weeks. Other such sacrifices followed. Fearing that they will also suffer the same fate, some members decided to look for a way out. They assassinated Soldatyenko and his wife and tried to get out from the catacombs. Unfortunately for them, just in the same day, the Romanians had tried, albeit unsuccessfully, to fill in the catacombs with smoke. Unable to get out, the partisans used the flesh of the Soldatyenkos to stay alive for the following days. After the smoke dispersed, they got out from the catacombs and surrendered to the Romanians, who photographed them and what was left of their comrades. The Romanians widely publicized this story in order to discredit the attempts at armed resistance. According to the Romanian count, of the 13 members of the group, 6 had been shot and eaten, and 7 had managed to come out on surface, of which 6 had been captured by the Romanian forces and 1 managed to get away. The story of the Soldatyenko group remained strictly secret until the end of the communist regime, so that not even Soldatyenko's family had any information on the circumstances in which their father had died. Initially they were told he was executed by the Romanians, and then later on they were told that there is no clear information to say how he died. Jesus fucking Christ. Yeah. So, there's that. I mean, what else can you say? Now, Solonari here says that the story was widely publicized, and it is kind of true, although not really. I've asked older people in Odessa on whether they've heard about this. None of them had heard about it. And the only reason I knew what to look for is because... a very old man who died a few years ago had told me a very similar story. I always thought that it's probably a bit far-fetched. I mean, he only told me about the stew, not about the borscht. I had no idea they were both. But, you know, I assume that it's probably a bit far-fetched. I mean, you know, cannibalism during wartime, especially during war-induced famines, are not exactly unheard of. Least of all in the Soviet Union. But I was like, come on, between the soldiers? Well, yes. So there's that. Now, the thing is that this kind of activities occurred multiple times in the 40s. And specifically with Odessa, I will have to say this. You know, the... grandchildren of those people who resisted in Odessa are resisting now. These people will not be put down. And I say in Odessa because, you know, traditionally, even during the Tsarist Empire, you know, Odessa has always been slightly different than the rest of the empire or the rest of Ukraine or whatever, the rest of the Soviet Union, really. I mean, you know, Odessa City was always something a bit special. Odessa has plenty of such stories of to the average Western European of today are essentially of unimaginable brutality. For those of us who've been living very close to Odessa for basically our entire lives, we're like, nah, yeah, I don't know, that kind of sounds believable. Again, when well, a similar version of another version of the same story essentially was told to me, I was like, well, maybe they didn't really make stew, but yeah, cannibalism, it kind of happens. So, uh, yeah, for instance, about 200 years ago, in the early, well, a bit before 1820, 200 and something years ago, the people of Odessa burned down the entire medical establishment and all of the police officers because they were being held in quarantine unreasonably. So, I'm just saying, there's a long history with Odessa doing these kinds of things. Now, one more thing I have to say about this story. It was widely publicized then during wartime for 1 or 2 or 3 months, maybe half a year, but not more than that. After that, it is true, Mr. Solonari is correct when he says that it was considered a secret. And it was considered a secret because, well, when the Romanian military found out about it, they're like, "Oh, do we really have to publish it?" And they published it for a little while, and then they just withdrew it because, well, it sounded unbelievable. Even then, even in those times, it sounded unbelievable. So they're like, "Jesus Christ, man, just cut that shit down." And then the Soviets were like, we cannot say that, our fellow comrades literally ate each other and made borscht out of each other. So definitely we're not going to say that. And, whispers of this story, at least on this side of the border, started being heard after the 1970s, even early 1980s, because the communist regime in Romania turned very anti-Russian. So these kinds of things, not necessarily anti-Russian, but definitely anti-Soviet. So these kinds of things definitely were a good story. But even then, the story got withdrawn soon after because food shortages started here, and maybe some people would have gotten the idea of maybe eat a commie, which I'm not sure would that have been a good idea. I don't know. Probably yes. Not because I have any concern for the commies, but it can be poisonous. I mean, really, it's just commies. Ugh. It's just terrible. So yeah, borscht and stew out of commies, made by other commies. Ouch. That's all I had to say. Cheers.